Now, talking of the ecosystem, we have our opening panel, one I've been really excited for. I'm going to hand over to Lamide Johnson, who is the Deputy Director of the UK Nigeria Tech Hub, to kick off and introduce this panel on the future needs of the Nigerian ecosystem. So over to you, Lamide, and welcome the panel.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Anthony. Hi, everyone. Super exciting to be here today. And we have such a mix of panel. We'll be talking about the future needs of the Nigerian ecosystem. Now, as you know, the Nigerian ecosystem is on the move. More importantly, the tech ecosystem. It has become a leading hub for entrepreneurship on the continent, and thanks to several strengths that we have, including a growing number of engaging international investors and partners, especially the UK, and a lot of people have interest on the ecosystem. Today, I have with me three great people, ecosystem players. I will allow them to introduce themselves. We have Adenike Sheriff, the principal at Future Africa; Ife Adebayo, Special Assistant to the Vice President on Innovation and Technology; and Damilola Teidi, Director of Startup Support. Adenike, could you introduce yourself, please?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure and an honor to be here. My name is Adenike Sheriff, and I work as principal at Future Africa. Basically, that's a fancy way of saying that it's my job to source amazing companies who are doing really innovative things and provide them with the capital, coaching, and community that they need to scale, as well as help investors who are looking to invest in tech companies gain access to these companies. Really great to be here once again.
Thank you very much, Adenike. Ife Adebayo.
Thank you, Lamide. My name is Ife Adebayo. I work as an assistant to Nigeria's Vice President on Innovation. So I advise on policies, projects, and programs that the government can do to support the technology and innovation ecosystem in Nigeria. Prior to this, well, I've had this role since 2015. Prior to this, I used to work for as a developer for a UK company, SDL PLC in Maidenhead, yeah, that's all about me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ife. Damilola.
Hi everyone. Good morning. My name is Damilola Teidi. I'm the Director of Startup Support at CC Hub. I have about 9 years experience in the technology ecosystem, working as a software developer, supporting startups and running startup myself. At CC Hub, my role at CC Hub, I support startups across, especially early stage startups across different sectors, and also across different stages, working with different partners as well.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Damilola. I'm going to start the questions with you. Like I said, we are going to be exploring the future needs of the Nigerian tech ecosystem on this panel. Now, Damilola, over to you. CC Hub is one of the most well-established names in the Nigerian innovation, and they drive the startup ecosystem forward. Now, reflecting on this, where do you think the support for the early stage founders is at the moment, and what do you think are the gaps we have to fill going forward?
Thank you so much for the question. So I'm probably going to be reiterating the answers because even Honey mentioned some of the gaps, and a number of people also know that as well. Early stage entrepreneur for me would be around from idea stage down to maybe your early product when you have customers. So just good to define that. And why is this stage important is also because, we're building a pipeline, right? So there has to be people that are trying things at that early stages so that, we have a lot of successes in now and also in the future. And where a number of the entrepreneurs that you see now have also tried things and have also had that early stage period of their lives. What exactly is happening now and what is working now? One thing to mention, it's the amount of support that early stage entrepreneurs can get as opposed to, say, 8 years ago or even 5 years ago. You have a number of hubs, you have a number of programs, non-monetary support especially, so a number of mentors, advisors. You have quite a plethora of that, even across the country, not just in Lagos as well. I think in Nigeria alone, there are probably around 200 hubs or spaces that people can go to try things. What are the gaps? So there are a number of gaps, and this is not even sometimes particular to technology startups, but I would just mention three. One, on one end is infrastructure, and that is both the physical infrastructure and maybe for lack of a better word, spiritual. But by spiritual, I mean policies. So things that you can, the infrastructure bit, which is physical, things that you can see, so road networks, internet, and then the other bit, which is policies and regulations. I think there are still a number of gaps in these areas. Some, a number of people say you cannot entrepreneur some things that the government is meant to do. And so you would see that in terms of road networks, in terms of internet, especially when you move out of Lagos. Lagos, we have our own issues, but even when you move out of Lagos, it becomes really terrible. And you start to wonder, how do we even bring innovation in these areas? And when you look at policies, ease of doing business, it's not just by saying, oh, it's not theoretical. It also has to be, you have to show the workings that, okay, people can, even as basic as starting up your business is easy, down to actually, running the business, making sure that the regulation always favors you and there are no surprises, right? And then on the flip end that I want to touch on is also funding. And Honey also mentioned this as well. Early stage is very risky. And so we have to say that it's risky. There's a lot of failures there, but people need to experiment on a very large scale. And I think that is something that is still missing. We have a lot of, mentorship and advisory, and all of those things are important. Some people will say it's not. I believe that they're important because they create access. A number of entrepreneurs don't have access to these advisors, to these mentors. So these hubs, these programs create that kind of level playing field to say, hey, hi, this is my idea, Lamide, can you hear it? Or this is my idea, Adenike, would you like to help me on this? So that's important. But the other bit that is also important is funding at this early stage, for people to try and fail, and for people to, try and pivot and then come up with the likes of Piggyvest and Paystack that everyone is happy about and seeing today. A number of these entrepreneurs, and I know some of them, and I'm sure you also know some of them, had other businesses in the past. If someone didn't take a bet on these entrepreneurs, then we wouldn't have what we see today. So there is a fundamental gap in that early stage funding, grants, especially like on a large scale, and even investments, 20K here, 50K here. What can you do with that? Your idea sounds nice. How can we help you? Because when you go and when you go to all of these programs and there's a lot of talk and there's a lot of do this and very valuable advice, you need fuel to execute. Once you don't have fuel to execute, then there's a gap. You're receiving all of this advice and you can't do anything about it. Like, you literally cannot move. You can't even hire. So even when we work on all these talents, when it's time to hire, and we've seen this at City Hall, when it's time to hire, no matter how much it is to hire, there is a gap. So that's where the funding comes in. And these are just the three things I'd like to touch on amongst all.
Thank you very much, Damilola. The quote you were mentioning is, we can't entrepreneur our way out of bad governance. Talking about governance now, now when it comes to investment incentives, key business regulations, and creating international accessibility, what steps are currently being taken by the government to enable founders to more easily set up and grow their businesses in Nigeria?
Thank you very much, Lamide. Damilola, I agree with you that we cannot entrepreneur our way out of bad governance. And this is why I think before I speak about the steps that the government is taking, I think one of the key things that the technology ecosystem in Nigeria needs to understand is that there is value in engagement with government, right? So when you find that government has specific policies that drive support for farmers, for example, it didn't happen because the farmers were in their farms. It happened because they came together and they engaged with government. Similar for health, similar for women, etc. So as an ecosystem, I think we need to come together and have a lot more engagement with government. And a lot of this has been happening over time. And I think one of the things that the government did, I think in 2018, was the government set up the Technology and Creativity Advisory Group, chaired by the president, chaired by the vice president. And what that group has done is it's a group of private sector and public sector stakeholders who come together and give government advice on what the various steps that should be taken to support the ecosystem. One other thing that is currently ongoing is the government is working on a $500 million innovation fund. The process of this also began in 2018. 18, one of the key issues mentioned by Damilola, which was also mentioned by Honey, is about finance. So the Innovation Fund is going to address 4 key pillars. We'll address the pillar of finance. How can we get financial support to with grants, equity, and debt to support the ecosystem? Infrastructure, how can we support those who are running innovation hubs, technology centers, workspaces? How can we support infrastructure on broadband, etc.? Skills, how can we support those who are trying to get the necessary skills to enable them to build their own products or to support the ecosystem generally? And finally, which is one of the issues that Damilola talked about, again, the enabling environment. So how can we have a secretariat that is being funded, but is being driven by the private sector, by the ecosystem itself, but a secretariat that engages, because when you look at government, we have the executive. When you look at the issues of business and you look at the executive, you also look at the federal, the state, and the local governments, who is engaging directly. If the federal government has its own processes that are not in line with the states, like we had the issue in Lagos State where some policy changes affected some startups quite recently. So how do we have a secretariat that engages at the federal, states, and local government level? How do we have a secretariat that engages on the law enforcement side? How do we have a secretariat that engages on the legislative side? One of the key things that we're working on, for example, is the Startup Act. How can we have legislative backing that supports the ecosystem and protects against arbitrary change in rules and laws? So I think these are just a few of the things that government has been doing. Of course, not to forget to mention efforts also of the Ministry of Communications and Digital Economy, and also of NITS, the Nigerian Information Technology Development Agency, who have a lot of regulations and a lot of projects that they're working on also to support the ecosystem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ife. Interesting thoughts there. Adenike, now Future of Africa is focused on connecting innovators and investors across Africa. So where should we be looking at for the next wave of investors in tech in Nigeria? Do you think it's homegrown, or we should focus on international funding?
It's not either or, it's both. We can't say where should we be focusing on for the influx of capital into the continent, because the world we live in today is becoming more and more decentralized. We've had economies growing leaps and bounds. For example, a very formidable company, one of the most formidable investment companies in the world is Naspers. Naspers is a South African company that invested in Tencent, a Chinese company. And that stake, became one of their best investments. So we can't say, if the Chinese had the opinion that since Naspers is a foreign company, we should probably be focusing on more homegrown investors, it probably won't make a lot of sense. So we need active participation and support from everybody that can be involved. And the key to get started here is actually education. Angel investing is very risky. Investing is very risky. We are very used to the idea of debt as investing in Nigeria as a whole right now is something that is common. So I'll not say that investment is not going on. It's what kind of investment is going on. People are comfortable with the idea of debt because they'll get their returns and their interest, whereas the alternative to debt is buying equity in companies. And we've seen banks go to IPO. We've seen flour mills go to IPO, where equity investors and shareholders there at the early stages can recoup their returns. So what we need to start planning to do now is creating an enabling system for technology companies to be able to get to that level and give the investors the confidence that they will get their money back. Investment is not charity. As much as it involves risk, investors still need to make their returns. They need to make the money back. So what we should be focusing on is what are the ways that we can create an enabling environment for exits. That has started already on a very small scale. We're seeing acquisitions, we're seeing mergers, we're seeing buyouts, but the very highest level of that is that we'll begin to see, special purpose acquisition companies. We'll begin to see more IPOs. Jumia had an IPO 2 years ago, but it was not in Nigeria. So when will we see a Nigerian company actually be able to IPO on the Nigerian Stock Exchange and return money to investors? Those are the things that, we need to start looking at. So it's not, should we expect funding to come from funding foreign investors, or should we expect funding to come from local investors? It's that where value is being created, we're going to see both sides of the table come together to invest in these companies.
Thank you very much, Adenike, for that brilliant response. Ife, back to you. Now, I heard you mentioned the Startup Act that you're working on. So I'm sure, I'm also certain that perhaps you've seen some best practices being done internationally that can be adopted into the Nigeria tech ecosystem to boost opportunities for founders to scale out ventures. What are some of these best practices you've seen that you think the government would want to, or perhaps consider adopting here in the Nigerian tech ecosystem?
So there are a couple of ideas that have been looked at. So for example, when you look at the startup acts in countries like Tunisia, for example, and you look at the various policies around tax rebates for investors and all of that. These are things that we'll be looking at to say, if you will be investing in this ecosystem, if you're investing in this space, what sort of support can you get? And another issue that we're looking at very closely is there are certain regulations and legislation currently in Nigeria that people like Adenike, for example, would tell you that, oh, if I want to set up a fund in Nigeria, there are certain rules at the SEC, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, that does not encourage that. So how do we look at these existing regulations by various government and regulatory agencies, and how do we either use legislation to exempt startups within the ecosystem from these regulations, or how do we engage directly with these government regulatory agencies to see how this can be tweaked to encourage more funding to come into the ecosystem? Another thing that we're seriously looking at the moment is the skills space. How can we provide large numbers of Nigerians? How can we give large numbers of Nigerians the opportunity to develop their skills? And with the COVID-19 pandemic and the interest in organizations, a lot of organizations are more open to remote working now. How can we provide skills that enable Nigerians to be able to provide their services to international organizations and also local organizations just sitting at home? So these are some of the key things that we're looking at the moment.
Great. Someone asked a question and I'm just going to mention it. So someone asked, interesting thing Ife has noted about the startup policy and the $500 million fund. How will the policy work in line with bad government actors making arbitrary decisions like we've seen recently and you've noted yourself?
So I haven't said government makes arbitrary decisions. I've said we need to engage.
Policies that have affected the startup ecosystem.
Yes, policies have affected the startup ecosystem. We're hoping to reduce these clashes of ideas by engaging more with the ecosystem. However, in direct response to his question, so one of the things that we've also found is that we need to, as much as possible, ensure that a lot of the things that we're driving are being driven by the private sector itself. So currently we're working on the feasibility study for the $500 million Innovation Fund. This is being driven, and the fund is being led by the African Development Bank, and PwC is currently running the feasibility study. And one of the key things we've done in that feasibility study process is engage directly with the ecosystem. So the ecosystem defines how the fund will be governed. So we're trying to avoid a situation where we carry $500 million and put in government coffers. We're trying to look at how we can run this fund almost like a private, like a private sector fund with a lean, structured policy implementation, project implementation unit that drives this, but that pulls in people from the ecosystem, people from CC. We've had meetings with Damilola at CC Hub. We've had meetings with Iyaboyeji from Future Africa. So we're pulling all these ideas into a pot and looking at how best we can ensure that this does not suffer from the bureaucracy of government and the political influence of government, or how it can run, being driven by the ecosystem and taking control of by the ecosystem itself.
Thank you very much, Ife. Damilola, now, as you would have noticed, when we talk about Nigeria, there's a huge focus on Lagos. But as we look into the future and then on a more national level, where are the emerging hubs? And where else has not been on the map that we should be looking at? What will be important when broadening the ecosystem more deeply on a national level?
You're mute.
You're mute.
Okay, good. We're good now. So instead of calling like certain places, I think maybe I'll just look at maybe the fundamentals of what I think are the fundamentals. Okay. Why is Lagos the way it is one of the things that we need to look at. What has attracted a number of things to Lagos, right? And Lagos is not perfect, but what are the things that have attracted, whether it's, a plethora of internet service providers, people who are trying to work on, infrastructures in Lagos, whether or not the government is doing that, what has kept that, what has kept people determined to try and bring things to Lagos? And I think when you look at other areas, that's the first thing that you want to be able to do is, okay, in this particular state, how do we ensure that we can attract these same things that have been attracted to these particular states? If it's infrastructure, if it's internet that is needed, how do we get it into our states? And I think there are a number of governors that are looking at these areas. How do we get those things first into the state? Then the next thing I feel that one would need to look at is, what do we then have as a state? Not everywhere can be the commercial hub. Some places would be the hardware hub. I know that I've seen a number of things around Aba being, technically maybe people are looking at that area as like a hardware hub area. But what do we have in our own states? Is it scale? Do we have a number of people who are talented? Is it, hardware? What exactly can we be known for in our states? And then where can we, tap into innovation? And for this, I feel like, because in CC Hub, some of our projects used to take us around schools. And I remember going on one of those road shows, and once we got out of Lagos, my brothers and sisters, I was just dumbfounded. I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't even understand how innovation could even come out of any of the schools because of what they lacked. And I feel like that's one area that is missing. Like, if we're going to tap in innovation, then maybe build things around schools or within schools where there is a knowledge exchange, not just, oh, I'm going to build things here. And it may be something else. It might not be school. So I'm using school as an example because that's what I know. And you're saying, okay, this hub would give knowledge to the school. So there's a demand and there's also a supply. There's a push and pull. This is what is required in innovation around in the country. This is what is happening around the world. What do you have within the school? So there's that knowledge exchange. There's that innovation exchange. And once that's able to happen, I feel around the multiple schools, I think that's like, there are schools that have so many people, so much talent, so many people trying to do things. If you take those schools, you take innovation hubs around those schools, then, or center of excellence around those schools, then there's a lot of things that can come up in terms of innovation within those states that would be different from Lagos. Right. I think fundamentally, these are the things that we can look at, not to mention particular states.
I like that you mentioned that the ecosystem support organizations actually should take some of their programs to other states. And sometimes, we really need to help these people connect to what their core is and what they should actually focus on. Thank you very much, Damilola. Adenike, for founders in the audience, those here and those people who are starting to think about launching a business, where would you recommend they start when it comes to seeking support from the ecosystem? How do they best understand and navigate the opportunities currently available?
Right. So first of all, when you're starting a business, I like to tell people, not all businesses need funding. What type of funding will your business need, and at what stage will it need it? So if you're just probably just trying to validate the idea that you're building, which means that you have your first few customers, you know what you're trying to build, you understand the concepts. If you've built the earliest version of your technology, if that's the case, and at that stage, what you really should be looking at is who are the right people to talk up. So the ecosystem is made up of different players. You have like the growth stage funds who are happy to fund you, when things are already in motion. You have the early stage funds, and even early stage funds are sort of split into two. You have sort of the seed funds who want to see traction, they want to see revenue. It needs to be really clear where you're going, because like Damilola said earlier, there's a lot of risk involved. You also have the Precede Funds, which will, who are happy to work with you when you have a tiny bit of traction, a tiny bit of revenue, you probably have just your minimum viable product. You have accelerator programs, you have incubator programs who will be happy to work with you at those very earlier stages, especially if you don't have a lot of traction yet. You may not get a lot of cash, but it will help you take your idea to the next level where you then be able to get the money. You have people who would invest in you, give you debts, investments in exchange for interest at a later stage. So what kind of business are you running? If you're simply trading, there's no incentive to me as a venture investor to invest in you, not because your business is not good, but just because it's venture backable. Venture capitalists are looking for outsized returns. We're looking for, hundreds of millions in dollars in returns. So if you're trading and even if you're making $1 million in revenue every year, it does not mean that you're the right business for me to invest in, because how far can that scale and how fast can it scale? Are you solving an important problem that has never, been solved in that particular way before? Another thing I think people tend to overlook is actually their friends and family. One of the first people, some of the first people who would invest in your venture, whether through introductions, through monetary support, are your friends and family. And I think that, abroad, people have that locked down, but here, because there's a lot of distrust, you have people coming to you saying, oh, I want to start this business, but there's really no guarantee that they're going to do what they've said they will do. We don't see that happening really much, but if you're starting something, you need to believe in what you're doing. You need to be confident. Investors are going to be privileged to invest in you. You are not begging them for money. You are giving them the opportunity of a lifetime to partner with you and get returns in the process. They are going to help you. It's a mutually beneficial relationship. They are not doing you a favor by investing in your business. It's a business transaction. You're providing value as well. They are not investing in you because they feel good or they like you as a person. They are investing in you because they think that your business is going to give them money back. And I think that that's something everybody tends to forget. Like, investors are looking for returns, and we'll say no to businesses even though it's a business of risk, we have to manage the risk as well. So we'll say no to businesses if we feel like they're not at the stage that we need them to be at. Like to tell founders is, sometimes it's not the first time you broach an investor that you get invested in. Create a relationship. Reach out to them at the very earliest stages. Send them progress updates as you make progress. Let them know, okay, we had 10 customers in March, now we have 15 customers. That way they become invested in your journey. They are able to keep track of where you're going. And when you come back in fact, most times they'll be the ones say, I think that you are now at the stage where we can look at writing you a check. So take advantage of incubators, accelerators, apply for grants. That's something that I see a lot of people ignore. Grants won't take equity in your business. They won't ask you for interest. And there are so many grants available for you to take advantage of. We've had some of our portfolio companies get grants from organizations like the African Development Bank, and other organizations. So apply for grants. It's basically free money, even though you have to go through a rigorous application process. So I think, those are some of the things that founders can take advantage of.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Adenike Sherif. Now I have one last question and for everybody. What's one resource, podcast, book, mentor, speaker would you advise the over 200 people on the call here today to read, listen, or follow? One person only. I'm going to start with Ife. He seems to have it all figured out. Ife.
Well, not really, but one that I have found quite useful is the Startup Nation. Startup Nation. If you're in the ecosystem, I think it is one that you should read, especially if you're within the public sector space. It will give you a lot of ideas on how to structure your policies to support your ecosystem in your country.
Thank you very much, Ife. Startup Nation, just a small book, but really, really brilliant book. Damilola. You're mute again.
Okay. I was thinking, is this a site following CC Hub? and probably Bosso as well.
That you mentioned it already.
Just for the, I mean, if you want to learn more about what's happening within the ecosystem, what programs are available, aside pushing our own content, we also do push content from other hubs, whether it's local or foreign as well. So there's probably a number of things you can learn from there.
Thank you very much, Damilola. Adenike.
For the book, I'll say read Prosperity Paradox by Efosa Ojomo and Christine Clayton. Really great book on how market creating innovations can lift nations out of poverty and into prosperity.
Brilliant book by Efosa Ojomo and Clayton Christensen. Thank you very much, Adenike. Thank you, Damilola. Thank you, Ife Adebayo. This has been such an interesting panel, and I have been honored to moderate it. Over to you, Anthony.